Well, good morning and welcome to the Meet Us in the Garden series. This morning, we are going to be hearing about children's gardens from Master Gardener Becky Foltz.
Thank you for that introduction, Susan, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. As Susan said, I'm Becky Foltz, a Lake County Master Gardener volunteer. I'm so happy that you could join this Meet Us in the Garden Zoom presentation. Today, we're going to talk about children's gardens. We'll get into a little history, talk about the purpose of children's gardens, discuss some common themes, and finally, we will talk about what you can do with the children in your life in your own backyard. As a side note, when we talk about children's gardens, we are talking about kids of all ages. I will say though, that in my experience, the younger children, say up to age 8, are most receptive to the activities that you'll see today. For older children, the focus might shift to activities in your own yard, activities revolving around nature in general, activities like hiking, climbing, canoeing. Many of the things that you see today are referenced in the handout that you received when you registered. If you see something you like, you'll be able to get more information. Also, if you have any questions, as Susan recommended, just go ahead and put them in the Q&A portion at the bottom of your screen. When the presentation concludes, we will get to those questions. So let's get started with a little history. This is Fanny Grissom Parsons, one of the early pioneers of children's gardens. Fanny did not have any gardening experience when she created the first garden for children in 1902 in New York City. She was influenced by her physician father, who saw how poor living conditions were affecting the health of people in the city. She is pictured here at the DeWitt Clinton Park in New York City, located at 53rd Street between 11th and 12th Streets. Fanny led the school gardening movement, which was a nationwide initiative to create gardens for children. Fanny believed that gardening would teach children values and skills that would be applicable to their lives in the city, teaching brotherhood, cooperation, self-respect, and dignity of labor. The school gardening movement peaked between 1900 and 1920. This photo shows gardens surrounded by warehouses, factories, slaughterhouses, tenements, and congested streets. In 1906, there were over 75,000 of these gardens nationwide. And while there were programs for children at some botanical gardens in the country, Fanny saw that not all children had access to those programs. This is another photo from the Children's Farm Garden at DeWitt Clinton Park. Here's a photo from a little later time period, think about 1928, and this depicts children cultivating in the garden at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden. Their children's garden program was established in 1914 by Ellen Eddy Shaw and is the oldest children's garden in continuous use in the US. This is a World War I era photo and shows the Avenue A Children's Garden in New York City. This photo is from our own backyard and shows students learning at the Children's Garden program at the Cleveland Botanical Garden. In 1958, Paul R. Young received an award for outstanding horticultural achievement for his work educating school children. By 1928, playgrounds started emerging as another way for children to get outside. This photo shows a modern iron and steel playground in Lenox Hill, New York. First thing I see when I look at this photo is all the safety issues. Children's gardens are now at many botanical gardens across the US. This is the Nature Play Garden at the Chicago Botanical Garden. Here's the Enchanted Woods at Winterthur Museum, Gardens and Library in Delaware. There's the Huntington Botanical Garden in Los Angeles, the Indoor Children's Garden at Longwood Gardens in Philadelphia, the Discovery Garden at the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, and the Hershey's Garden at the Cleveland Botanical Garden. While the activities at these gardens may have changed over the years, the purpose for the children's gardens is still the same. They connect kids with nature. They stimulate curiosity, teach a sense of responsibility, enliven and ignite the imagination, and awaken a sense of wonder. And speaking of wonder, Rachel Carson, the conservationist and author of Silent Springs, said, if a child is to keep alive his inborn sense of wonder, he or she needs the companionship of at least one adult who can share it, rediscovering the joy, excitement, and mystery of the world we live in. Why are children's gardens so important? Well, more and more children are growing up in cities. They are spending less time outdoors. And it's estimated that by 2050, over 70% of our population will be urban dwellers. There are many benefits to children's gardens. Children thrive when they're exposed to nature. The natural environment is critical to physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And research has shown that a green environment supports cooperative behavior and physical health. Keep in mind that children learn best when they use their 5 senses. They are active learners who use their 5 senses to give them a total picture of their experiences. Our senses help us to figure out what is going on in the world and to help us decide whether to enjoy an experience or not. Here are your 5 senses. And according to D.H. Lawrence, the English writer and poet, there is a 6th sense, and that is the sense of wonder. So what can you do in your own backyard? Well, you can do some simple things or some very elaborate things. As a minimum, you can involve your kids in all the activities that you like to do, like watering plants and trees, playing in the dirt, harvesting vegetables, digging in the dirt, picking up sticks, or planting mums. Do your kids need gardening tools? Well, they don't absolutely need to have them, but in my experience, I can guarantee you that when you put on a pair of gardening gloves, the kids are going to want to put on a pair as well. When you pull out that gardening trowel or that rake, they're going to want one to use as well. So you don't necessarily have to buy a whole set as pictured here, but give them something to work with. So let's get started with a vintage flower garden. In the 1950s and the 60s, typical yards in America contained a lot of green grass and lots of flowers. Here, Bob and Betty are getting ready to plant a flower garden with their father's help. After noting that all the danger of frost had passed, they pick the right spot in the yard, making sure the soil is right and that there's lots of sun. Bob and Betty turn the soil and then rake it so the soil is nice and level. They make sure to remove any rocks. The first seeds that Bob and Betty plant are marigold seeds. Mother showed them how to use their finger to make a 1/4 inch hole in the soil and place the holes about 12 inches apart as the seed packet recommends. After putting the seeds in the soil, they covered each hole with fine soil and pressed down firmly. Then Bob and Betty plant zinnia seeds. Mother says zinnias are a little like Bobby. They are always hungry and thirsty. Betty has a good idea to mark the rows with sticks covered with the seed packet. Next, Bob and Betty plant larkspur seeds. Betty likes the beautiful colors of the larkspur. Asters are next. Here the kids ask about the weeds, and the mother replies that they aren't so bad if you keep up with them. Finally, Bob and Betty plant petunia seeds. Daddy recommends that instead of planting in rows, that the children just toss the seeds on the soil and cover them lightly. As the plants grow, they can thin out the weaker plants. Here is Bob and Betty's garden in full bloom. Look at all the little friends that have come by to visit: the duck, the bunnies, the kittens. There are many different types of gardens that you can grow. Sensory gardens are perfect for kids. You can make one garden that appeals to all or some of the senses, or you can do a garden for each one of the senses. For sight, you'll want to plan for color throughout the season. Think about daffodils, crocus, and tulips for spring. For summer, plant zinnia, strawflower, marigolds, and hollyhocks. Consider large leaf plants and colored foliage like coleus as the season turns to fall. Some descriptive words you can use with children. Do you think the flowers are pretty? What colors do you see? Do the flowers look clean or dirty? Are they big or small? To appeal to the sense of smell, plant herbs, scented geraniums, and roses. Talk to your children about whether they think the smells are nice or not. For taste, consider planting mint, berries, edible flowers like pansies, nasturtiums, and vegetables. Ask, is the taste sweet, salty, or sour? Does it taste good or bad? For touch, plants that are fuzzy, prickly, spongy will appeal to kids. Plant succulents, lammerts, dusty miller, coxums, sedums, snapdragons, cactus. Ask the kids, is the plant hot or cold to the touch, rough or smooth, soft or hard, wet or dry? To appeal to the sense of sound, plant Chinese lanterns that make noise when they dry, or grasses that rustle in the wind. Money plant and plants that will attract buzzing bees and chirping birds. Is the sound you hear loud or soft? What sound does that insect make? Sensory gardens will always appeal to kids of all ages. Be sure to encourage their observation skills. Here is a garden called a bird and butterfly garden, which is also so interesting to children because of the birds and the butterflies that visit it. This garden needs a sunny area and should have a variety of annuals, perennials, herbs, and bushes. Consider planting bee balm, clematis, coxum, daylily, phlox, pinks, purple, coneflower, Shasta daisy, butterfly bush, and thyme. If you look closely at this garden design, you'll see a bird bath and a butterfly house. I always have butterflies visiting my clematis. Here's a design of a Native American garden, which focuses on plants that are native to the North American continent and those grown by natives prior to 1492. Wow, you could really get in a little history lesson with this garden. Plant corn, pumpkins, popcorn, squash, beans, blanket flower, gourds, and use a trellis in this garden so children can see how some plants like to climb. Here is a kitchen garden, which is so valuable because it teaches children how vegetables grow and where food actually comes from. As plants grow, children are more likely to try different things. You can plant early, cool weather plants like lettuce, cabbage, radishes, and then later plant tomatoes, peppers, green beans, cucumbers, and strawberries. Here is a picture of a square foot garden. Kids like this design because it's simple and easy to understand. They can learn how plants and their fruits grow. They can learn how to weed, how to spot pests, how to water and harvest. Maybe you could give each child their own little square yard to maintain. Here's an activity that you can use in your vegetable garden, and that's a garden graph. You have the number of fruit up the side and the vegetables going along the bottom. Have the kids count how many of each come from a plant. Here's an insect graph. Have the kids look for bees, have them look for butterflies and ladybugs, and count how many they see. You can get ideas for graphs on the internet, or just use a spiral notebook and make up your own graphs while you're out in the garden. Seed collecting is another great idea for kids. And it's great because after they're dried and stored, you can bring those out the following years, and the kids have a real sense of sustainability. It's a good idea when working with small children to focus on plants with larger seeds so that they can handle them more easily. Otherwise, they might get frustrated if using seeds that are too small. Larger seeds like beans or peas, nasturtiums would be great. One thing every outdoor children's area needs is a sandbox. This design is called the Picture Frame Sandbox, and it's from Olive Percival's Children's Garden book. The middle of this design is deeply sanded, and the four sides are flower beds with 4 old-fashioned herbs and flowers. You can border those flower beds with 1-inch strips of painted wood. Sandboxes are not only fun for children, but they encourage social interaction and cooperation between children, and they strengthen finger and hand muscles, which is important for handwriting, sports, self-sufficiency tasks like buttoning and tying shoes, etc. Here's another sandbox in a yard, one that's right along a pathway, one that's right on a patio or at the edge of the patio, or to keep things really simple, you can just get a Fisher-Price sandbox. The advantage to these store-bought sandboxes is that they do have lids, so your sand can stay nice and clean. Here is another Olive Percival garden, and it's called the Poppy Garden. It has sand pathways and poppy flowers in the beds. Since poppy plants may be difficult to obtain and or difficult to grow, you could plant the sections with different plants, like Shasta daisies, African daisies, or blue flax. You could plant bushes or small trees at the start of each path. Note the water feature in the center. Children who play with water are strengthening their gross and fine motor skills, their hand-eye coordination, and physical fitness through lifting and pouring, stirring, sifting, and squeezing. Here is the water feature at the Frog Hollow Enchanted Woods at Winterthur Museum in Delaware. Notice how engaged those children are with the water. Here we are at the Hershey's Children's Garden at the Cleveland Botanical Garden. Again, you can just see how interested those kids are in what they see. And here at the Chicago Botanical Garden, the whole family is in the water and engaged. If you're lucky enough to have a creek in your backyard, just let your children go and play in it. Here is a fairy ring, and this fairy ring appeared in my front tree lawn last year or the year before, and I have to admit I was enchanted by it. Fairy rings are naturally occurring growths of certain types of mushrooms that grow in a circular formation on lawns, fields, and forests. Folklore says that cultures across Europe have traditionally believed that fairy rings are the dwelling places of fairies, elves, and other magical beings. They're little rings where fairies dance and play. This garden from Olive Percival is planted with blue flowers like low-growing forget-me-nots, vesper bells and verbena, early borage, blue butterfly larkspur, and ageratum. The center is planted with grass or lady mint, fennel, or parsley. How relaxing it would be to sit in the middle of this fairy ring and read, dream, or just play. Here's another example of a fairy ring made with crocus. It's not that difficult to get a circle onto your lawn by using a stake and a string and some sort of container with chalk in it. Once you've done that, you can then dig holes and then plant your crocus. Plant this garden, this flying carpet garden, and let your child's imagination soar. The middle of this garden is green, like the enchanting carpets from the Orient. Plant them with Lippia, verbenum, or sweet clover. The flowers are bright colors planted in diagonal stripes. Here, pansies would be a good choice. The flower areas are separated by narrow footpaths that are sanded, and the borders are either narrow wooden green strips or smooth sea petals of a uniform size and half buried in the soil. Teepees are another fun thing for kids. This one is from the nature play area at Penitentiary Glen in Kirtland. This beanpole teepee is from the American Christmas Museum in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. And look at this young child coming out of his beanpole teepee. What a great place that would be to hide. So there are instructions in the handout that reference a website called Magical Children's Garden that gives you instructions on how to build a teepee. Here we see some teepees at the Paul Smith Children's Village at the Cheyenne Botanical Gardens. This isn't a teepee, but a mulberry tree, but the same idea is there, and that is give the child a place to hide and play. Here is a garden called Sliced Cake. Each slice of cake is planted with alternating pink and white flowers. Notice the fun things around the garden: a seesaw, a swing, a tea table. What pink and white flowers would you plant in this garden? Here is a labyrinth, which is an ancient symbol that relates to wholeness by combining the imagery of the circle and the spiral into a meandering but purposeful path. The labyrinth represents a journey to our own center and back again into the world. In this design by Olive Percival, the center is a rose bower, a vertical sea of flowers. Flowers like yellow pansies, pot marigolds, white sweet alyssum, daisies, white petunias, and pink bearded tongues are good for the path. This fairy flower labyrinth is from the Enchanted Woods Garden at Winterthur Museum, Garden and Library. Inscribed on the stones are sketches of flowers like cowslip, foxglove, fern, lily of the valley, and toadstool. Here's what a labyrinth might look like incorporated into your garden. That circle design just needs to be tucked away in the curve of a path. I like this merry-go-round garden that came from the Betty Crocker's Kitchen Garden. Using an old wagon wheel, you plant vegetables in each of the spokes. I found that wagon wheels are available in all sorts of sizes, and you can find them at secondhand shops or antique stores. You plant the vegetables in each one in between the spokes, and each child can claim their own planting area. Plant radishes, lettuce, onion sets, garlics, carrots, chives, or beets. Then you can plant flowers like marigolds around the circle. Look at those darling plant markers, and those were traced from cookie cutters. Speaking of cookie cutters, this would be a great activity for kids. Painting rocks, everybody loves to do that. Here's another take on a merry-go-round garden, and this one is planted with different varieties of thyme. How about planting a garden that has your child's name growing with flowers? This one I think says Maria. Olive Percival suggests dropping seeds of cress and mustard in your carved out name in the soil. Then when it grows, you will have sandwiches. You will have the herbs for tea table sandwiches. Here's an alphabet garden. Here you want to plant plants from A to Z, or asters, balloon flowers, and catmint to exanthemum, yarrow, and zinnia. Bug hotels, also known as an insect hotel or a bug house, is a man-made structure created to provide shelter for beneficial insects to overwinter. You can provide a variety of nesting material like twigs, pine cones, seed heads, lichen, small logs, bark, plus anything else you can think of. You can see how interested children would be to observe these bugs. Solitary bees like to nest in hollow twigs or stems, and ladybugs like to winter in large groups in between dry plant material. Here's an example of a bug hotel on a really small scale, and it's just a small wooden box that the kids are filling with items they find around the yard. Well, I could go on forever talking about all the fun things you can do with children outdoors. I think the important thing is just to get them outside. Providing things for them to do will spark their curiosity. Hopefully you saw something today that will inspire you to implement a new garden or activity in your own backyard. Perhaps one of the gardens, a sandbox, or a teepee. Here in Northeast Ohio, we have some great children's gardens you could visit, like Hershey's Garden at the Cleveland Botanical Garden or Penitentiary Glen in Kirtland. In the words of Olive Percival, if for the first 10 to 12 or 14 years of life, the children of today could have personal flower gardens in which to play, to study, to read, to work, to dream, the world tomorrow would be greatly lightened of its ugly and menacing burden of materialism and general faithlessness. Garden children, no matter what happens to them through the years, find life sweet and big and precious. To them are given vision, poise, and eternal youth. Thank you for attending this Meet Us in the Garden presentation.